Welcome everyone to the Living Consciously television show, coming to you live from our Denver, Colorado studios. We are also streaming on the internet, especially on YouTube Live, on Google Hangouts, and we are streaming on consciousevolutionmedia.com. I'm your host and moderator, Coach Steve Toth, and our theme today is how to get over domestic violence and child abuse, especially from our early childhood. Our guest today, it's my honor to introduce Tom North. He is an author, and I would say that he is probably one of the greatest experts on this subject. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Thank you, Steve.
Awesome to have you. And then we also have our cast, of course, as always. And so to the very left, we have Linda Dyer. She's joining us from Australia, where the snow doesn't fall. But today it does.
Yes, thank you. It's wonderful. It's actually freezing here in Sydney, which is very unusual because
I got to notice. What do the kangaroos do with that?
Well, they just jump around in the snow. I guess you've all seen the kangaroo fight that went all around the world this week. I thought of you, Steve, when you keep saying kangaroos are in everyday life here in Australia. Well, recently they have been. They're coming out into the suburbs.
There you go. Awesome. And then next to Linda, we also have Nina de Verderosa. She's joining us from that city called Las Vegas, where the lights never do go out. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stephen. No, the lights never go out. That's a good thing, though.
Yeah, awesome. So, Tom, let's get related to our viewers, and also we'll be podcasting this show, so as well as to our listeners. I'm just curious a little bit about your background. Let's get related to give us a little history about Tom North and how you get to do what you do today and how you ended up writing this incredible book.
Well, that's a mouthful. Okay, so
no pressure.
I'm going to take the fifth on that one, Tom.
Okay, so I live in Carmel, California, and have lived here most of my adult life. And the reason we're on air today is because I am one of 20 children living in a combined family. My mother had 8 children. My father died when I was 6 years old, and she remarried a man who had 10 children.
Wow.
So we know that 8 and 10 is ridiculous, but that's what happened. And so after they combined these two large families, within the next 3 years they had 2 more children, which makes 20.
Wow.
The story was picked up in the media of the day as an amazing combination of 2 large families. Saw the story in the newspapers. She called my mother and my stepfather, and she told them she wanted to make a film about the combination of these 2 large families. Now, keep in mind that this was the early 1960s, which was a time of television sitcoms featuring white suburban families like Leave It to Beaver and Ozzie and Harriet and so on. My 3 Sons.
Yeah.
And so and
it was about hippies and flowers and love and all that stuff.
Yes. It was
My 20 children.
but not 20 children. And so Lucy wanted to make the great American sitcom on steroids. And so she did. And it was a very successful film. It was the 4th highest grossing film of 1968. Lucy received a Golden Globe Award for her portrayal as Helen North Beardsley, my mother, and so the film was very successful. It was a very warm-hearted, very funny, entertaining film. I've seen it.
Were all your children in it? All the siblings, the 20 siblings, were they in it?
That's a really wonderful question. Lucy offered all the children the opportunity to play their own part in the film.
Mm-hmm.
But my parents, being tremendously religious people. They figured that they didn't want Hollywood ruining their children. They figured they would rather do that themselves.
In the privacy of their home.
Yes, yes.
Whoa, digging already, huh?
Yeah.
We haven't even got into the show yet. And it's
I'm just reading Tom's energy. That's all I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the film was successful, and it was very heartwarming, and it was very funny. But the irony is that it was 180 degrees the opposite direction from what the children were actually experiencing.
Wow.
The issue.
Why did they portray that rather than the truth?
So when Lucy came into the house, because actors will go to learn something about the character that they're going to play, and so she came to Carmel to meet my mother and Frank Beardsley, and very soon after she met them, she took my mother aside and she said, "You keep that man away from me." Because she picked up on his energy right away.
And that was her husband at that time?
That was, she had married Mr. Beardsley at that time, and so they were already married, and the families had been combined, and all of the North children had been adopted into the Beardsley family. So the problem is that Frank Beardsley was psychotic. And he was dangerous to be around. And when my mother, who shared this with me later in her life, she said that when she met his children, she saw 10 children living in terror for their lives.
Wow.
She was afraid he was going to kill them. So her solution was to marry this man and save his children from him and save him from himself.
I thought you were going to say and kill him.
That's a tall order. So was Henry Fonda in this movie?
Yes, Henry Fonda played Frank Beardsley, and he played this wonderfully wise and loving character.
Which was opposite to what this is now your stepfather, right?
Right.
So the movie is a dream movie, how everything should be and could be, or utopia, as we might say. But the actual truth, I think where you're going, the actual truth was 180 degrees opposite of what the movie was portraying. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
All right. So are you ready to?
Did your parents get paid for it? Was the reason why they did it was it for money?
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
Did they get payment for the movie?
Oh, yes, they did receive payment for the movie. Another interesting point to raise, because here my mother and Frank Beardsley were Mr. and Mrs. Simple American, and they got a phone call from the Queen of Comedy. And so they just said, "Lucy, whatever you want, we'll do that." And so Lucy paid them a small sum, and they were offered actually $25,000 or 5% of any film that might ever be made. So they took the cash, and of course the film made, it was the 4th highest grossing film of that year.
Wow.
And it made over $40 million that year.
So just so we can put this into perspective, Tom, how old were you when this was going on?
I was 6 when my father was killed. He was a Navy aviator, and he went down in a training crash in a jet. And so it was just 15 months later that my mother married Frank Beardsley, and I was 7 years old.
Wow. And did you see the movie fairly early on?
Well, the movie came out in 1968. I was 14 years old by that time. And I did see the movie. I thought it was wonderful. It was funny. It was really enjoyable. It just wasn't the truth.
It was nothing like your family, right? There was nothing evolved about your family that you knew of because you lived it.
That's Correct. That's correct. I could only wish that Henry Fonda was my father.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty
Or
cool.
a character like him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Definitely an interesting actor.
So,
So,
sorry.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Why did they pick up? Why did they pick up a nice side of your stepfather rather than telling the truth? What was the problem there? Or did your stepfather change his attitude towards these people and showed them a different picture?
Well, keep in mind that this was the 1960s, and so there was very little challenging of parental authority at that time. Whatever mom and dad said was going to be honored, and that was certainly the case. In fact, when I was 10, I took two of my, there was an event that I write about in True North, The Shocking Truth About Yours, Mine, and Ours, which is the book we're discussing. And so Frank Beardsley went to attack one of my sisters, and I stepped in between them. She got away. I got the brunt of his anger. And so following that, we went up to the local Catholic church to get help with this crazy man. And when I told the priest what was happening in the house, he looked at me down his very long beaked nose, and he said, "Tommy," he said, "I want you to go home and apologize to your father for saying bad things about him." And my insistence was, "He's not my father." And the priest said, "Of course he is. And I want to see you in confession on Saturday morning, young man, to confess these sins against your father." Mm-hmm. Well, if the local clergy wasn't going to help us, we knew no one was going to help us.
Oh, you thought no one would.
That's correct.
So how much did Hollywood know about the truth?
They didn't.
Well, so Lucy knew right away when she met Frank Beardsley what she was dealing with. And so, you know, she had an objective. She wanted to make a sitcom. And the character, the real character, was not going to fit what she had in mind. So she came, she got the information she needed, and she left.
Wow.
And the information she got was a phony information. It was not the truth. But it was what she wanted.
It was what she wanted. It was a fantasy. It was designed to entertain, and that's exactly what it did.
Yeah, well, Hollywood hasn't changed much since.
No, not at all.
They just now do it better and bigger.
Right.
Did they have all 20 children in the movie?
Yes, they did have all 20 children. The names were the same. You know, my mother's name is Helen, so Lucille Ball played the role of Helen North Beardsley. Henry Fonda played the role of Frank Beardsley. And so, in fact, much of the film was accurate when we think about the logistics of raising a family of 20 children. They got that right.
It was just the little things that went on behind the scenes that nobody knew about.
That's absolutely correct.
So did you have, what was the makeup of the way you lived, you know? Like, did you have 8 kids to a bedroom or with triple bunks? Or what was it?
Or a large house.
Yes. So Frank Beardsley was a military officer, and so he did have the benefit of the military allowance that was given for each child. And so he got more money for more children. And then there were also the military medical benefits, and we call them commissary, which is the supermarket benefits and so on. So they had some economies of scale going for them.
Did they have a big house or 4 bedrooms, 5 bedrooms?
Yes, it was 8 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms, and it was 3 stories tall.
Wow.
Oh.
Well, so at least you didn't have to stand in line too much to go to the bathroom.
That's right. That's right.
Were the children able to mix with each other? Because I would imagine there was a lot of ages the same age, or a little different. So, 10 and 10, two young ones.
Yes, interesting question. There was one for every year from 1 to 20. And no one had the same name, which one would expect to see the same name with 20 children, and no one had the same birthday.
Yeah.
Who
I feel like I need to dive into the middle of this right now, so I can't wait any longer. So I'm going to kind of do it in a different way, which is normally what I do. So we all know this is something that nobody wants to talk about really publicly in terms of what happens when kids are growing up. I certainly still remember when I was 12, and as I became aware of my sexuality, and we all know that that boys think about their sexuality. We all know girls think about their sexuality. When you put 20 kids together in one house, where it's almost impossible to watch all of them all at the same time, how does that work out when these kids are getting really curious, to a certain extent, being even playful? How did you notice that? I'm just really curious about that, because this is going on in every family.
Yes, that's a very insightful question, Steve. And the problem that we had in this household was Frank Beardsley. In the words of my younger sister, he was a ultra-violent, alcoholic, misogynistic pedophile.
Wow.
So not only did we have our own budding sexuality to deal with as we approached puberty, but we had his perverse sexuality to deal with.
Oh, my younger sister.
Well, not just my younger sister. All of the females in the family, as they approached puberty, were abused and molested by him.
And how many girls were there?
There were 12 girls and 8 boys.
Oh, he had a field day, yeah? Wow, that's
he did. And the girls went to my mother and they complained and they said, "Don't you know what's going on?" And she refused to acknowledge it.
Why do you think she did that? Did not want to lose him and all the money coming in, or what was her objective of that?
Well, we wish there was a lot of money coming in, but there wasn't. There was that initial $25,000, and then when my mother and stepfather realized how much money the film was making, they went back to Lucy and said, "Hey, how about a little more money?" And so she gave them another $10,000 to sign away the royalties to any future showings of the film. Well, that was a bad decision too, because the film has been shown about 10 times a year on television every year for the last almost 50 years. Wow. So, but getting back to your point, Steve, is that the girls were in a bad position with this man, and my mother was totally in denial about it, and she was so concerned about maintaining the image that the film presented that anything that challenged that fantasy, she simply wouldn't acknowledge it.
Wow. So how were you all dealing with this? I mean, there's 20 kids. Well, give us a just a brief view into like what happened at one day of the life of Tom North in this house.
Well, it was when I was little. It was not uncommon for me to come around the corner and there would be Frank Beardsley in the hallway, and he would knock me across the room, and I would get up and say, "What was that for?" And he would say, "Just for drill." That's the kind of person he was. He was constantly berating the children, finding things to find fault with, constantly. He was just a really bad person.
Was he tougher with you more so than his own children that he brought into the family?
We considered him to be an equal opportunity abuser. So he didn't pick on one person or another or one family or the other. He just was abusive to everyone.
Yeah.
And how old were you when you found out about the girls, you know, the abuse happening with your sisters? How old were you?
Well, I knew something was amiss because I would walk by the family room, the media room, if you will, and he would have all the girls out there in their underwear doing calisthenics. Mm-hmm. And I thought this was inappropriate. And I wondered where was my mother in all of this, but I was a little boy and I really didn't want to raise questions because the only thing that would result from that is that I would be beaten. Mm-hmm. So I left it alone. Now, to answer your question about how old was I, it was not until I was an adult that I was told by my sisters about the sexual abuse.
So you never caught him, so he did it in such a way that he never, even with 22 people in the house, the mother and father, all the kids, nobody ever caught him?
Actually, the girls knew, and they knew, and they did their best to look out for one another. The story is told of one of my younger sisters who, when she was approaching puberty, my mother actually said to her, "It's time for you to go see your father." And the other girls, yeah, really. I mean, it's just sick.
This was a sick woman.
Yes, yes. And so the other girls said to this young girl, "Don't go see him. Don't do it." And she had no idea what they were referring to. So she went to see him, and he molested her.
Now, what do you mean by she went to see him? She purposely went to see him, knowing that he wanted to see her, and knowing there was
no. I was not there, but the way the story was related to me is that my mother went to her and said, "It's time for you to go see your father." Now, but I think what happened is that my mother was so worn down by the stress of raising 20 children and of dealing with this.
And pretending.
And pretending. And I think, Steve, I think you hit it right on the head there, because she had been telling lies for so long that she could no longer tell the difference between right and wrong.
Yeah. She believed whatever story she made up about the whole thing, she believed it.
Correct. And
maybe she didn't have any idea of the ramifications. Like, her initial thing that you said was to save those 10 children. But in essence, she not only saved them, she turned a man that was obviously not totally balanced onto her own children. And, you know, there has to be some sort of sense of guilt, and maybe for her it could have been just a sense of overwhelm, like, this is just bigger than I ever imagined it was going to be. What have I done? But then she really didn't feel like she could do anything.
Well, maybe she was threatened too. Maybe she was threatened and never said anything.
Well, you know, as I write about in the book, in True North, the overwhelm was a very big factor, is that she was simply worn down by the stress and the strain of raising 20 children. So in that sense, she really did bite off more than she could chew. But psychologists will tell you that women who find themselves in this untenable situation will eventually begin to feed the children to the monster in order to save themselves. And that's what she did.
Mm.
Yes, I've actually experienced that with coaching clients that have had similar stories where mum, because not only is he abusing the daughters, he's also abusing the wife. He is demanding the sex from the wife at any time that he feels like he needs to have it. And she's like, whoa, you know, keeping up with this monster, not only running the family, but also keeping up with his demands. And one of a coaching client some time back said to me that her mother just said, you know what, I've had enough of this sex with you, I'm going to go and get the daughter. And that's where it all started. And we have, you know, for most of us, that is just unbelievable. But it happens, like you're saying, Tom. And it's like the mother says, you know, what can I do? How can I stop? You know, how can I save myself so I can help the rest of the family, which she wasn't really doing. But she has a perception of helping.
Yeah. So this is unfortunately more common than we'd like to believe.
Well, I was going to ask you, is it happening more and more and that we don't really see or we're not in touch with, so it's happening to a lot of kids out there. Why? Well, you actually went to your priest, but why are so many children not going? Are they afraid or are they threatened, or what is the common denominator here of them not turning these people in?
Well, the common denominator, if I understand the question properly, is the desire to maintain the secrecy. When I came home from the Catholic Church, and it was a failed visit to the church to get help. The next day, my mother called me aside. I had come home from school. And she said, I have never been so embarrassed as when I spoke with Father Dudonay this morning, and he told me what you did last night. And she said, if you ever tell anyone what goes on in this household, it will be the last thing you ever do. Now get out of my sight. So it was that desire to maintain the fantasy.
Yeah.
So Tom, what has happened to you in terms of abuse? Would you be willing to be a little bit more specific, just personally?
What was that last part of the question, Steve?
I'm just curious, personally, you being part of this family, what did you have to go through? What was the child abuse that you have experienced?
Well, I mentioned a moment ago, you know, the regular beatings that we all experienced. Frank Beardsley did attempt to seduce me, and I write about that in the book. There's some speculation that he was bisexual, but you know, the abuse was on every level. He abused all of the children emotionally, physically, psychologically, sexually. It was across the board.
Wow. So so let's move forward a little bit. You know, from the family, and I'm just curious as to how did this way of growing up in this family, how did that affect you as Tom North, as a young man, and what did you have to go through in your life to get to where you are today?
So, as I relate in the book, True North, The Shocking Truth About Yours, Mine, and Ours, by the time I was in my teen years, I suffered from severe depression, and I was self-medicating with recreational drugs. Now, it's not uncommon for teenagers to use recreational drugs, but I was using them almost every day for about 5 years. And so that's a downward spiral. And so I was in a pretty bad shape. And fortunately, when I was in my early 20s, I was introduced to transcendental meditation, commonly known as TM. And so I began to practice TM, and that was really the beginning of my recovery.
Did you find?
And were you still at home through this? Like, did you stay at home, or you know, because a lot of abused kids tend to want to leave the nest early and go and find something that's different out there than what they're experiencing. How old were you when you left home?
Well, I was 17 when I left home. All of the children in the Beardsley family left home as soon as they could to escape the abuse.
And another thing that I wanted to talk about was just recently we had a really amazing lady on as a guest, Glinda Lee, and she actually spoke about when people have a form of abuse when they're younger, that they actually rewire their brain to the point where they become their fright or flight, because becomes something that they go to very frequently. So, and it's because of this fear of trying to survive all the time that becomes a new pattern of behaviour. Do you think the drugs that you took were just to cover all that up, to feel better about who you were, that fear that you had inside of you?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, the purpose of, there's really only two reasons that people take recreational drugs. One is to create an alternate reality that they can plug into and replace their normal daily existence. And the other is to do what you were just suggesting, is to cover up all of the emotional scars that they carry. In fact, there's an interesting study that was done by the Center for Disease Control in association with Kaiser Permanente hospitals here in the United States. And they studied over 15,000 recipients of government-sponsored health care. And what they found is, this is called the ACE study. And ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experience. And there were 12 categories of adverse childhood experiences. And what they found was that for those people who were surveyed who were 40 years of age or older and had 3 or more adverse childhood experiences, the incidence of adult onset chronic disease was 100%. Think about that statistic. So we might try and get away from our childhood by burying it with drugs, burying the emotional scars and baggage. It doesn't work that way. It will manifest in the physical body.
So how did you overcome as a young boy when you started taking these drugs and then you started realizing what the problem was? How long was it for you to actually absorb what has gone on, and it was really nothing to do with you, but it was somebody else, which was your stepfather doing it, because you hadn't really done anything wrong, though you had lived through the whole thing? How long did it take you to sort of come to terms with yourself and what had gone on and what had happened?
That's a great question, because children internalize just about everything. Whatever experience they have, they say, well, it's my universe, so I must have done something to make this happen, and if it was bad, then I'm probably a bad person. And that's what children conclude from having adverse childhood experiences, that it's their fault. And the problem is...
Let me just ask something here. I think this is important. Did you at the time when this was going on with you, did you feel that, for example, from my own childhood experience, I couldn't imagine that my parents could do anything wrong, because I just looked up to them. They were almost like God. So if they couldn't do anything wrong, then something must be wrong with me. Was that similar with you?
Absolutely the case. Yeah. So this is unfortunately the response that children have. And so it creates a misperception and a misidentification that we carry into adulthood.
So how long did it take, getting back to my question,
yes,
take you to sort of realize and sort of understand it, or if you ever did understand it, I'm sure you do now, because otherwise you wouldn't have written the book. to sort of to absorb it, understand it, and try to get it out of yourself and feel like a person, a real person?
So that has been a lifelong process.
Yeah.
I've been in therapy of one kind or another my entire adult life. Beginning at the age of 17, I was very fortunate, and I write about this in the book, that one of in fact, my best friend in my teen years, his father was a psychiatrist who was instrumental in the very early days of the humanistic psychology movement. And some of the people who were there were Fritz Perls and Eric Berne and Bob Goulding. And so Bob Goulding ran an institute for group and family therapy. And so when I would visit there, I would hear these people in the other rooms going through these emotional catharsis. And I resonated so dramatically with what they were expressing. And I went to Bob Goulding and I said, could I sit in on one of those sessions? And he looked at me very intently, like, why would a 16 or 17-year-old boy want to sit in on a therapy session? And so I did, and I wrote about it. It's actually a very interesting segment in the book.
But he didn't really know everything that had gone through you, and when you heard all this, it kind of clicked something in your mind that it was something you wanted to understand and you wanted to kind of sort out because it was something familiar to what you had been going through.
I related very directly to the emotional depth and expression that these people were going through on the other side of the wall.
Oh, wow. That's amazing at such a young age to recognize that and to understand and say, wow, that's where I need to be.
I was desperate.
Yeah. Okay, that answers the question.
Yes.
So did you go back and tell any of your other brothers and sisters that you had found some help and they could too, or were they all on their own journey?
Well, they were all on their own journeys, and actually what happened when I began practicing transcendental meditation is that the very day that I learned to meditate, I went back to visit the kids, which I did regularly to just check up on them and make sure that they were still alive. And my younger sister was going on a date, and she looked very cute, and I complimented her. And a compliment was something that didn't happen in the Beardsley household. Mm-hmm. And she said, what have you done? You've done something different. What are you doing? And I said, well, this morning I learned to practice TM. And she said, I want that. She said, you're different. I want that. And eventually 11 family members learned to practice TM.
Wow.
Are you still, let's move on a little bit. Are you still involved with all of these children? Because this is bigger than a football team. I mean, do you have Thanksgiving together? And now they've got, do you have children? Do you have children?
I do have children. I have children. I have 2 grown daughters.
Oh, wonderful. So, and obviously they're perfectly all right and you protect them 100%, I would imagine. But do you all get together and are you still friendly with each other?
So this is a wonderful point to raise because, excuse me, in the later part of the book, chapters 26 and 27, I wrote about the family therapy sessions. Now, I took the entire family through family therapy. And what happened is that it was wonderfully cathartic and very positive, and everyone learned a lot about themselves and about each other. And after the family therapy sessions, the North family agreed to get together every 2 or 3 years for a family reunion, and we do that.
Can you still do that?
Excuse me?
You still do that?
Oh yes, we still do that.
And how many is it now?
Well, there's of course the 10 children. There's the 8 original North children, and then 2 who are ours, and they're invited. And then there are, I want to say, about 36 offspring of those 8 children, and so it's a pretty big group.
I would.
Yeah, it sounds that way.
Yeah.
So Tom, I'm curious as to, have you been able to forgive yourself, your stepfather, and your mother?
I'm sorry, Steve. Could you repeat that question, please?
Oh, sure. I'm curious as to, have you been able to forgive yourself, your stepfather, and your mother? So
that was something that came up during the family therapy sessions. And so, yes. Now, I didn't get all of it during the family therapy sessions. I did get a modicum of forgiveness, but forgiveness is an ongoing process. And so I, in 2013, finished 47 weeks of a program that exists only here in Carmel, and it's called Breakthrough for Men. And it's a place where men can go and work on these very issues of poor childhood programming and so on. And so I was addressing those very issues of forgiveness of my mother and Frank Beardsley, and I did achieve an integration of that.
I think it's different.
And did you find writing the book? Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, did you
Linda,
find
go
that
ahead.
in your writing of the book that you have, like, I've just written my book. It's actually at the editors now, and it's about to go to the printer. But for me, it was almost like a catharsis, in that as I wrote every chapter, I associated into it, and I had the most amazing clearings. Some of them were really happy and really jovial, and I laughed, and others I howled. I really literally howled, like, you know, when my mum passed away, or the doctor partner I was going to work with just suddenly died of a car accident. And you would have thought, I would have thought, as a coach of many years, that all that stuff was under the bridge. But when you write about it, it's really different experience. And I found myself in my own room just literally getting so involved in this book. And I wondered if you had a similar thing, where this has been perhaps the best thing that could have happened for you, is to write it out and go through each of the emotions as you have been writing, so that you have a much better clearing and your own level of catharsis at the end of the book.
I love that point. When I was researching the writing of memoir, I came across an article by a literature professor who said there were 2 things that he said that really jumped off the page at me, or off the computer screen. And the first was, never lie to your audience, because your readers, because they will pick you out and they'll put your book down and never pick it up again, because readers don't like to be lied to. And the second thing that he said was, if the writer don't cry, the reader don't cry.
Interesting.
And I thought that was so profound.
Yeah.
And so you really, as a writer, one has to experience that catharsis and infuse the book with that, or you're wasting your time.
As of what you went through as a child, and you went to the priest, and you were kind of turned away, what advice would you give to any child or any family that's watching right now, because I'm sure there might be some young people watching, advice of how they can actually go further than what you did? You were slammed down, and you were told, and you were too frightened to do anything, and which didn't make the situation any better. How can the young people now try to do something, or do something a little different to what you did, and not get slammed down?
Well, of course, in today's world, we have social institutions to facilitate a remedy for these kinds of domestic violence and child abuse issues. Back in the 1960s, everyone deferred to the parents. Today, school teachers, medical personnel, people who are in a professional capacity, if they observe either strange behavior on the part of children or parents, or if they see bruises or cuts on children that look like they might have been incurred during domestic violence or child abuse, they're by law required to turn that over to Child Protective Services. Child Protective Services didn't exist when I was a little boy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So
got it. Let me ask the
I'm also
question.
intrigued about, yeah.
Yeah, just hang on for a second. Let me ask the question a little bit differently than what Nina was asking. So, you know, we were talking about your mother pretending, and you know, nobody was really telling the truth in the family. So, you know, I understand that there is a lot of this going on everywhere. And my question to you then is, so if people know, the family members know that there is an elephant in the room, but nobody wants to acknowledge that there is an elephant in the room, how do you begin to break through that?
So in the book, I write about the family therapy sessions. And my younger brother called me and he said, Tom, he said, I'm a mess emotionally. He said, I can't keep a relationship going. I go through girlfriends like socks. And he said, 3 therapists have told me that my issues arose in a family context and they need to be resolved in a family context. Would you help me put together a family therapy session? And I said, Phil, think about the scale of what you're suggesting. If we had 4 or 5 people in our family, that would be one thing. But you're talking about getting 22 people into a room to discuss things they've been trying to forget their whole lives. And there's the elephant in the room. And so he said, are you going to help me or not? And my response was, I wouldn't miss this for the world.
So did you help him or did you kill him?
Well, I've always been something of the family organizer, and so I said, let me work on this and I'll get right back to you. So I wrote a letter to the family, and that's in the book as well. And we did. We had, I contacted a therapist, and she moderated everything. She was wonderful. And for the first session, we had 8 of us showed up. Interestingly, there were 4 Beardsleys and 4 Norths that showed up.
Wow.
And it was so positive. We got so much accomplished. We actually went 10 hours on Saturday, and we came back and went 10 hours on Sunday with barely a bathroom break. And it was so intense that we decided to do it again. And so we went out and talked to the other family members and said, you have to come, this is wonderful. And so the following month, we had another weekend marathon, and we went 10 hours on Saturday and 10 hours on Sunday. And we got a tremendous amount accomplished. And we decided, go ahead.
It's strange because they all felt the same as you felt. Everybody had the same feeling, the same thing, and they all wanted to do the same as what you had actually done. And that's why they came to you. And then you all got it out, and you spent all this same time that you had spent together getting involved in it. And now you're all together discussing it and getting it out of your head and out of your mind.
I'm sorry, you were fading in and out there at the end.
I was saying that now you were in a room together and you all wanted to achieve the same thing, and you were all relating back to your childhood, what you had all experienced and all been told to shut up and whatever it was.
Right.
And you were all able to be together. But the thing is that you were all together, and that's just amazing that you all had the same feeling of getting this relief.
Yes, yes. And the interesting thing is that most of my siblings were terrified of what they might say about their own experience. And in fact, one of my older stepsisters, at the very beginning, there are certain things that cannot be talked about.
Yeah.
And if those things are talked about, I'm going to leave. And so the therapist said, if you feel you need to go, you're welcome to leave. Well, having been given permission to not talk about her issues, we couldn't shut her up for the next 2 hours.
What an amazing relief for her, though, that she didn't realize what she had just done about being so honest, and she was taught not to be honest.
She was told that she had permission to not be honest.
That's right.
Which then immediately stimulated her honesty.
Yeah.
I wondered in those meetings, Tom, did any of the children feel like they were more abused than the other? Like, did anyone feel like their lot was heavier, a heavier bag, if you will, on the backpack to carry?
No, but you bring up an interesting corollary to that. And that everyone understood that they had experienced much the same abuse as they were growing up. But what happened is that some of the children shared experiences that the others knew nothing about. There was many experiences shared that I was unaware of. And it created a tremendous amount of compassion in the room for each other.
With compassion and trust with each other. You now started to trust each other with your stories.
Right, right. And the interesting thing is that there are 20 different stories among this family. And so if you had all the other 19, if they were to write a book, I think that there would be significant variations in the stories that are told. I'm the only one who has stepped forward to write a book. I have an older sister who attempted to write a book, but she didn't get very far because it was too emotionally challenging for her.
When you went through all this, what was the outcome of your mother and father, or your stepfather actually? So what was the outcome of all their feelings about bringing all this stuff out, of each one of them being so different? What was the outcome of the mum and dad?
So, my mother came to the Saturday of the last session. There were 3 sessions, and she came to the Saturday of the last session, and it was so enormously cathartic for her. And I write about this in the book. Some people have told me that it's hard to read this section of the book without crying, because I related what my mother went through, and so it was so wonderful to see her purge all of that emotion, or some of the emotion that had been buried within her for all those many decades. And so at the end of that day, she said, Frank needs to participate in this. I'm going to bring him tomorrow. And he came. And he came.
So you were all together in one room of everything that happened over the years with your mother and father, your stepfather.
Yes, yes.
What was that like?
Intense. I went home after those sessions. I went home to try and share this with my wife Connie, and I would say, well, today what happened was, and I'd start to cry, and I couldn't stop crying.
Of course not. This is very emotional.
Yes, it was so intensely emotional, and so it would take me hours to relate to her what was happening, because it was all interspersed with crying, because I was just cathartic all over again.
You must have a wonderful wife. Sorry, go ahead.
I do. Thank you for saying so.
Tom, I'm very, very curious about how is consciousness related to your experience?
So you kind of take us to the next step of our conversation, Steve, and that is the evolution of my own consciousness over the years, having spent so much time in meditation and in therapy, and simply just knowing that that spiritual evolution and personal evolution is a daily process. And I think that that's probably the the most important thing that has come out of all of this for me is that realization that every moment is an opportunity for growth. Did I answer your question correctly?
There's no correct way to answer that question.
Can I just say something? I'm intrigued that the first 7 years of our life, we know we're imprinted by our parents, and then the next 7 years we actually tend to model one of them. Did any of the children become the father? Did any of them sort of start behaving just like him or behaving just like the mother? And because of that instinctiveness that we have as children to model.
So I have seen behavior in some of the children of my step brothers and sisters that suggests what you've just described, that they are modeling and continuing that behavioral pattern from the previous generation. But it takes quite a bit of awareness and presence of mind to stop that patterning. And I do share an anecdote in the book, True North, that about my own confronting of the programming that I received from Frank Beardsley. And it was very dramatic. And I have had people share with me, having read the book, that was one of the most important things for them to read because it helped them with their own parenting.
But then you weren't your father wasn't the father that abused the children. That was your stepfather. So I'm not saying you were fortunate, but you were.
Yes, that was a wonderful comment you just made there, because for the first 6 years of my life, I lived with the North family, and that was a household that was characterized by a lot of laughter, and my parents were very affectionate with each other and with their children, and they played with us, and it was a wonderful family environment. And so I feel fortunate that the early childhood programming that I received was very positive.
Yeah. Well, that sort of kept you maybe where you are today and why you did what you did, because you had those first 6 years.
I think it made a significant contribution to that, and that's one of the advantages that I feel I have as opposed to the Beardsley children who've known nothing but abuse their entire lives.
What about the two that were born between your stepfather and your mother, which are the two younger siblings?
What about the bond?
Yeah, well, how are they? Because they've got the father, the beer father, and the mother. And
okay. So the Hours. So the movie was Yours, Mine, and Ours. So you're referring to the Hours.
Hours.
Yes. And so they're very conflicted because they had a mother that they shared with the North children, and they had a father that they shared with the Beardsley children. And so they have a bit of an identity crisis. And of course, as they were growing up, we were referring to the North or the Beardsleys, and they were saying, "What are you talking about?" Because that wasn't their experience.
No. So you actually lived through all three.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh.
So, go ahead, Steve.
Go ahead. Well, I don't want to cut you off, but our conscious story is actually over, and this happens on every show that we do.
It was so fast.
Because time and space disappears when we are being present and being conscious. So I just wanted to acknowledge you, Tom. I think you are an incredible human being, and you are living proof. You and I'm sure many others. Including myself. I mean, I was beaten up every day by my mom, and look how well I turned out. So, we are living proof that. And
congratulations.
Thank you. That we're living proof that we all have the potential to get over all this stuff that's happening with us. in childhood. So I really want to leave the viewers and the listeners with that, because you know, it's part of all of us. It's part of our journey. You know,
Yeah.
If I asked you, would you want to, what kind of a life would you want, Tom, if you could have, you know, everything you wanted, and money and love was not at a lack? Well, would it be a different life?
And the answer is no. I feel very, very grateful for the life that I have lived. And
Yeah.
you raised such a great point, and I want to be sure and tell your viewers and listeners that the whole purpose of the book, True North, The Shocking Truth About Yours, Mine, and Ours, is to convey the message that we can take the broken pieces of a life and put them back together again and become happy, healthy, productive human beings.
Yeah,
Amazing.
fantastic message. So,
Beautiful message.
to any of our viewers, if you know, if you were touched, moved, and inspired by anything that Tom said today, and I certainly have been, you know, because I'm, you know, throughout the show I was really connected to you and to our other cast members as well. You know, I get it, because to a certain extent I can relate to you because of my own personal experience in my childhood. So, you know, my hat's off to you, Tom. It's you're fantastic, and thank you for actually writing the book, because now, you know, thousands and hundreds and thousands of people can actually read it and see themselves perhaps in your story, and can get strength that, you know, this can be done. This can be done.
Yes.
We can be healthy, productive, you know, human beings again. So
Wonderful.
thank you so much for what
You're
you
welcome.
do. Yeah,
I do
thank
have
you so
a
much.
I do have a website, Steve. It's
Go ahead.
called TrueNorthByTomNorth.com,
Okay.
and there's a lot of resources for people on the website.
I was on
Wonderful.
Fantastic. You know, we will put it on YouTube as well, your website address and all that good stuff. So and on our website also. So again, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to Living Consciously TV, and please be with us same time, same place on ConsciousRevolutionMedia.com, Living Consciously TV. Thank you all, and have a great evening and a fantastic week.
Thank you,
Thank
Tom.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Tom.